I'm going to give a super quick introduction before I hand it over to my colleague Lujain, just explaining that EAT wanted to make this opportunity available to the FoodSHIFT consortium, partly because one of our roles in the FoodSHIFT project as a network partner is to help with knowledge sharing and kind of connecting the FoodSHIFT project to other initiatives and opportunities in the broader space. And we wanted to talk specifically today about the upcoming United Nations Food System Summit as one of these potential opportunities. EAT is leading one of the 5 action tracks in the summit. And through this, there might be some ways for the FoodSHIFT consortium, either as a consortium or as individual members or your own organizations, to provide input and learnings and discuss in the broader context. So my colleague Lujain is EAT's Director of Global Action and also leading EAT's engagement in the UN Food System Summit process. So she'll give a presentation that gives a short overview of the summit and some of the opportunities to get involved. And then we'll have plenty of time for kind of Q&A and a discussion. So that's it from me, and over to you, Lujain.
Thanks a lot, Emily. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. Just to walk you briefly about the Food System Summit and Action Track 2. And I look forward to discuss with you like possible areas of engagement and answer any question that you may have about the summit. But before jumping into that, perhaps it's worth mentioning briefly about EAT and what EAT is all about as an organization. So EAT was established around 7 years ago by our executive chair and founder, Dr. Gunhild Stordalen, together with Professor Johan Rockström, who's currently the director of the Post-Time Climate Institute, to basically answer one question, which is how to feed a growing population enough healthy food without destroying the planet. And back then, there was no scientific evidence that shows what exactly we should eat that is good for both our health and the environment. So that's why they established EAT, which is a global leading science-based multi-stakeholder platform for transforming global food system. We are a non-profit independent organization that work with different sectors and stakeholders, including governments, cities, businesses, civil society, and others, to close knowledge gaps and translating knowledge into action. We have a very exceptional and diverse team, around 27. We're based in Oslo, Norway. And our team is around 13 nationalities with different backgrounds in relation to academia, policy, business engagements, innovation, and others. In addition to that, we have our EAT advisory board that is meant to provide input and guidance to our activities, to our strategies, and setting a direction of EAT. It has several high-level representatives across the from governments, business sectors, indigenous communities, civil society, academia, youth, and others. And this board is chaired by Professor Johan Rockström, and they meet around twice a year, so they get updated about our activities and EAT and provide input to our ongoing work. So we work in 3 different areas. One in relation to knowledge, to close knowledge gaps. The second one is to create engagements, and that's we have it like a forum that link different stakeholders and sectors together. And the second is action, which is translating the existing evidence and research into action. So the knowledge generation or closing the knowledge gaps piece, we have several examples. First is the EAT Lancet report, which actually 2 days ago was the 2nd anniversary of the launch of the EAT Lancet. and some of you might have heard of it, which has set the parameters of the planetary health diets and the planetary boundaries for sustainable food systems. And that was together around 37 world-leading experts from different institutes that have worked for 3 years to come up with this report. And then following up from the Eat Lancet, we have now 2 ongoing commissions. First is the Food Systems Economics, that is working on the economics of food systems in relation to health, sustainability, and social livelihoods. And that is together with the Food and Land Use Coalition and the Potsdam Climate Institutes. And we will be publishing an interim report this summer through the Nature journal to feed into the Food Systems Summit. And the final report will be published in 2023. And then the second one is the Blue Food Assessment, together with Stanford University, as well as the Stockholm Resilience Center, about the role of aquatic food in food systems. Then we have the engagement piece through our, for example, flagship forum, the Stockholm Food Forum, that we have it in Stockholm in June, as well as engagement with other global avenues, including the climate COPs, the UN General Assemblies, the World Economic Forum meetings, and others. And now in relation to actions, we work with the business sectors and cities and other UN agencies. If we take the cities as an example, we have the food system networks with the C40, where we're working on the translation of the Eat Lancet target into targets for at cities level through the Good Food Cities Declaration. And this is just an example of the impact that we have reached through the Eat Lancet report, where we have around 6,000 media coverage. It was covered for over 100 countries and over 1 million shares of social media. So it got a very global attention, and it initiated several discussions on what does that diet mean at a local level as well as at a national level. Now, just zooming in about the Food Systems Summit. So in 2019, on the World Foods Day, the UN Secretary General has announced that he will convene a summit on sustainable, healthy, equitable food systems in 2021 as we enter the decade of action. So this was a very strong message and recognition from the UN that we cannot deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals without transforming our food systems. Now, this summit is meant to be in late September this year in New York. A specific date has not been decided yet, given the current COVID pandemic. It's meant to be a People's Summit and a Solutions Summit. A People's Summit means involving every stakeholder, sector, and actor, because at the end of the day, food is everyone's business. And a Solutions Summit is because we want to come up with solutions and only discuss solutions that takes the food system agenda forward, as we need now to accelerate our action and progress. So we don't want another avenue to discuss challenges, but rather discuss solutions and what should be the next steps. There are like 5 objectives of the summit, and those 5 objectives represent the different 5 action tracks. So the first objective is ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all. So addressing food access, food security, and nutrition. And this is led by Lawrence Haddad from GAIN. Then this action track 2, which is our action track, which we're going to talk about further today, is shift to sustainable consumption pattern. And this is led by our executive chair and founder, Gunhild Stordalen from EAT. And then the third is boost nature positive production. So in relation to the planetary boundaries of food system, climate, biodiversity, oceans, land use, and others. And this is led by Joao Campari from WWF. And then the fourth is advanced equitable livelihood. So focusing on social equity and the livelihood of food system actors, including small-scale farmers, for example. And this is led by Michelle Nunn from CARE. And then last but not least is the Action Track 5, build resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. So food system resilience in relation to issues like COVID, for example, will be addressed there. And this is led by Salamil Haq from ICAD. Now, in each action track, there's a vice chair, youth vice chair, and a supporting UN anchoring agency. For action track 2, our vice chair is Ajay Verchakar, who's a citrus farmer and the chairman of Farmers for in India. And a youth vice chair, we have Lana Weidegand, who's a climate justice activist from Brazil. And a UN anchoring agency work closely with the World Health Organization, specifically the Department of Nutrition and Development, under the leadership of Francesco Branca. This just shows you the different areas of work for the summit. The summit has a special envoy, who's Agnes Kalibata, who's been the president of AGRA. She's actually based in Nairobi. And her deputy, Martin Frick, is based in Rome, in Italy, close to the Rome-based agencies. So in addition to the action tracks, there are several areas of work that are ongoing for the summit. It's quite important for the UN Secretary General and the Special Envoy that the summits, its processes, its outcomes are all based on the best available evidence, scientific evidence. And that's why they have formed an independent scientific group that includes several scientists from different parts of the world to provide that evidence to the action tracks and the summit as a whole. And they are divided into 5 different science groups that support each of the action tracks. Then we have a champions network in relation to the overall engagement and the mobilization of the summit. And that includes around 100 members that act as ambassadors for the summit and speak about the summit. The special envoy has a vision that by the time of the summit, we want 4 billion champions for the summit, so any consumer or citizens can be part of the network. And then we have the Food Systems Summit Dialogue, which is the official consultation tool for the summit that strengthen the bottom-up movement for the summit to make it truly a people's summit. And those dialogues run at 3 levels: member state dialogues, global dialogues, and independent dialogues. Member state dialogues are the ones that are run at a country level. So it's a member state-led dialogue, but they're meant to be multi-stakeholders, including other stakeholders like the business sectors, SMEs, cities, finance, education, and so on, to discuss what does a sustainable food system look like in that country, and what could be the possible solutions to take us through that, towards that system, and to solve several of the lock-ins and the barriers that exist right now. And the outcome of those dialogues will feed into the solution development that is led by the action tracks. And then we have the global dialogues that could be parallel to global convenings, such as the Biodiversity Conference, for example, or the UN Ocean Conference or others. And we have an independent dialogue where any stakeholder, consortium, or an organization is welcome and encouraged to convene their own dialogue, zooming in on a specific issue, question, or action track, and submit their inputs and ideas into the summit through the Food System Dialogues platform. And then we have a UN task force, since it's a system vision and it's a whole about food system, so it's concerned almost all of the UN agencies. So many of the UN organizations are actually involved in this summit process, and this is coordinated and managed by a UN task force that is chaired by UNICEF. Now, the action track, now just zooming in on the action track too, but before I do that, perhaps I could mention briefly what is the expected outcome that we want for the summit. First is in relation to elevating public discourse about the importance of food system summit to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And then secondly is to have a significant actions with measurable outcomes that are taken by different stakeholders by the time of the summit. And then third, have a high-level guiding principles that leverage those stakeholders' capacities toward food system transformation. And then last but not least is to have a system of follow-up and accountability where stakeholders can share their knowledge, their experience after the summit when they implement the solutions and they carry on with their actions, and have a new metrics of impact measurements of those actions that were announced. Now for action track 2, it links to several of the SDGs and not just SDG 12, which is the one in relation to sustainable consumption. But in addition to SDGs, it's an important key factor to deliver on the Paris Agreement and to deliver on international agreements in relation to non-communicable diseases and malnutrition, for example. So our vision for action track 2 is that by the time of the summit, first we need to come up with an exciting menu of game-changing solutions that shift consumption to healthy and sustainable consumption patterns. And then have a critical mass of stakeholders, whether that's governments, cities, business sector, educational institutes, finance decision makers, and others that are ready to announce commitments for action in line with such solutions. And then since our action track is about consumption, so we cannot do that without engaging with consumers and citizens. So we're working on establishing a global growing movement of people that start from now making changes in their daily food choices and demanding actions by governments and businesses to make those food choices accessible, desirable, and available. So that translates into 5 different areas of work. First is enable, empower, and motivate consumers everywhere to choose the healthy and sustainable food, and making sure that the vulnerable poor population group have sufficient access to healthy and sustainable protein sources. But at a global level, especially if we look at the more affluent population group, to curb the excessive consumption of animal-sourced food, in particular red meat. And since our action track also zooming into the health side of consumption, we need to reduce the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverage and the junk food, including ultra-processed food, for example. We're addressing the whole concept of consumption. So food waste is a main pillar of that. So according to SDG target 12.3, to have food waste from food service, retail, and household, and transition to a circular food economy. And together with action track 1 and 3, we need to make sure that food is not just healthy and sustainable, but also is safe for consumers. So addressing issues such as antimicrobial resistance, for example. So now we have organized our work into 3 main action tracks, work streams, sorry. So the first work stream is food environment, that will be zooming on creating healthy, sustainable food environment to enable people to adopt and maintain healthy dietary practices. So this work stream will be focusing on things like public procurement policies, zoning policies, the media and advertising, for example, the food availability. How can we create a truly enabling environment so people can choose the right food? And this work stream is led by Yan Yi, who is the president of the Good Food Fund in China. And his deputy is Mia McDonald from Brighter Green. And they work closely with the World Health Organization and FAO to come up with these solutions, together with the work stream members that go across different sectors. Then we have the food demand that is focusing on 2 areas, the product experience and the consumer experience to shift demand towards healthy and sustainable food. So product experience in relation to the taste, the desirability, and the food service. And then we have the consumer experience in relation to the education, behavior change, for example. And this is led by Danielle Vinard from the World Resources Institute. And then we have the circularity piece to have food waste from food service, retail, and household. And this one is led by Yolanda Kakipetse, who is an ex-Minister of Environment of Ecuador and has been the president of WWF Global. And she is supported by both UNEP and UNDP. Now, the way that our action track is structured, and this goes across the 5 different action tracks, is we have the leadership team, which is now around 16 individuals. And this leadership team, we call it the dream team or the meeting of the mind, where we were able to convene 60 individuals who are considered experts in the food systems. And they range from academia, UN agencies, business networks, civil society networks, youth activists, and the ones who have been working also in the public sectors to come up together in Action Track 2. And they have been categorized across those 3 different work streams: food, environment, demand, and food waste, to come up with game-changing solutions to answer the questions around shifting to sustainable consumption. And that leadership team, in addition to that leadership team, we have like a core team that acts as secretariat of the summit, where we have the cross-cutting levers of the summit representatives sit there. So the whole summit has 3 cross-cutting levers, which are the gender, finance, and innovation. And all the solutions that we come up with need to actually address those levers. Even though it's a UN-led summit, member states are encouraged and they're invited to be part of the work, and they're considered part of the extended leadership team. And we call it like a member state affiliated group for Action Track 2. And now we have 17 interested member states that are work with us in the Action Track. And they come from different regions of the world. In addition to that, the leadership team, they do not just come up with their own solutions, but we want to receive input and ideas from anyone who has it, actually. So that's why we have the open or the public platforms where everyone is invited to submit their ideas of solution. And also when we come up with those solutions, we use this platform to get feedback and assessment of those solutions that we come up with. And we host such public forums every 2 months. We had our first one in December before the holidays, and our next one will be on February 3rd, which is an open invitation to anyone to tune in, where including consumers and citizens, and you don't really need to belong to a certain institution to be part of the discussion. This is our timeline, which is quite short. We are currently in phase 3, which is identifying the key ideas for solutions. So by the time of mid-February, we need to come up with around 12 to 15 solutions from Action Track 2 to be presented, developed, tested, operationalized, and developed further towards the summit. The first important milestone for us is the pre-summit, which is going to be in July in Rome, in Italy, where each action track is going to present their draft of the solutions and work toward developing an implementation framework, guiding principles, and start to seek partnership commitments to take those solutions into actions. Now, the solution areas that we're talking about are quite diverse. And this is just an example. So the solutions could be in relation to policy, business practice, investment, innovation, gender, social movement, for example. So if we talk of food demand in relation to policy, we could look at food labeling, product reformulation. If we look at the circularity in relation to the investment, looking at the food loss and waste financing as an example. So one of the first deliverables for Action Track 2, and actually for all the 5 action tracks, is to come up with those game-changing solutions. And I keep using the term game-changing. And what we meant by that is to have a feasible action that is based on evidence and best practice that would shift the operational models or underlying rules, incentives, and structure that shape food systems, acting on multiple parts of the system or across the system to advance global goals and which can be sustained over time. And when we receive ideas for the solutions, there's a certain criteria that we want those solutions to meet. And these are just examples of those criteria. First, to have positive effects on ensuring equity across youth and marginalized groups, be a true departure from existing practice, address a long-term obstacle or constraint, acting on more than one component of the food systems, and can be implemented at sufficient scale, be ambitious and feasible, and be sustainable and persist in the medium or long term, and has intentionally an impact pathway that account for, minimize, or eliminate any negative impacts, and have co-benefits or mutually reinforcing on achieving other action track goals. For example, in action track 1, where they're focusing on nutrition and food security. If their solution only focusing on improving nutrition, but has a negative impact on the sustainability side, for example, related to action track 3, this solution will not be considered. And then we need to have a clear and timely and variable outcomes, and do not create any new lock-ins in the future. Our work doesn't stop or doesn't end by the time of the summit. It actually continues afterwards towards 2030, where we are meant to track the impact of the solutions and the actions that were announced. So that's why it's very important when we develop the solution, we create that accountability mechanism. One of the areas that we're looking at is actually a Countdown 2030 report, where by the time of the summit, the 5 action track chairs and the UN anchoring agencies present a report about the state of food systems. What do the current data and evidence say? And then present a report every year afterwards towards 2030 to monitor progress on the stakeholder commitments towards those game changers. So for us, our success is not just to come up with the solutions or answers to the questions, but our success is to translate those solutions into realities or actions from public sectors, private sector, civil society, UN agencies, and others. And even though our system summit is divided into 5 different action tracks, our aspiration is to move from 5 action tracks into 1 to deliver on sustainable development goals. So the solutions, when they are suggested from each action tracks, they're actually going to be assessed across the action track in relation to trade-offs and synergies. And so we come up with one game-changing and systemic solution menu that will be presented at the summit. So what does that mean for the FoodSHIFT consortium, and what are the potential areas for engagements? If you have a current initiative, or if you have an idea for a solution that you think actually answers some of the questions I have flagged, that actually addresses our areas of work that I have mentioned, you can submit your idea through our public online form that we are currently trying to disseminate, encouraging all stakeholders to submit their ideas to us to be considered for the final list of solutions. That was an open invitation that we have launched in December, and it will continue to be open till the end of this month. And currently we have received over 200 ideas so far from different stakeholders. So I encourage you to do the same, to actually amplify and scale the work that you're doing, and any potential initiatives that you think it could be in relation to food consumption. And then the second thing is to host a food system summit dialogue. You can visit the foodsystemdialogues.org, where every stakeholder who's interested to host a dialogue, where you can zoom in or discuss a certain topic or a certain issue for the consumption, for example, or after the solutions are announced, you can host a dialogue to see what those solutions means to you in your context, and even provide feedback to those solutions if actually work or not. And any interested stakeholders can just go to the website, register, and they will receive a toolkit to guide them and how to host those dialogues. And the outcomes of those dialogues can feed into the dialogues online platform, where we received it as an action track team to help us to develop those solutions further. And then third is to share your knowledge and experience. The Food System Secretariat has established a community platform, and the website is foodsystems.community, where you can register, have access to all the working documents of the food system and of the action tracks. You can know more about the other action tracks, and you can engage in online conversations with different individuals in the action track team in relation to coming up with ideas for solutions or discussing existing solutions or topic towards the summit. I'll just stop there and see if you have any questions. Also, I will post the link for the open forum, so you can have it in handy on the website chat.
Thanks, Lujain. This was a really informative, helpful presentation, and we do have some questions already that we've been collecting in the Q&A box and in the chat function. So maybe we'll just go through them one by one. Poppy has asked if the food environment work stream also includes education activities. I know you mentioned education kind of specifically in the food demand work stream, but if you could speak about how it fits into the food environment.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Actually, the education fits on all the three work streams, not just in relation to the food demand, but also the food environment and food waste. And those education campaigns will try to see how they can fit as a lever for across the solutions that are going to be submitted for the summit. In relation to the food environment, for example, one of the areas that we are looking at is the education in relation to the importance of the sustainable food systems, and how does that link to the individual health, as well as the different stakeholders in relation to the business owners and the decision makers, for example. And this is one of the details that we want to develop those solutions even further to see how they would address education.
Thanks. I think that answers the question very well. We have another question about whether the summit and the solutions are focused only on demand side, for example, changing diets. And actually, I'm not quite sure about this question. I'll read it out loud. My question is whether the summit and the solutions will be focused only on the demand side, i.e. changing diets, and the role of the supply side, e.g. the role of the agroecological production to achieve sustainable and socially fair diets recently proposed by FAO, the governance of the food system, or the role of regionalized food systems. So it sounds like, is there a specific emphasis on dietary shifts in demand, or is it across the full spectrum?
No, it is across the full spectrum. And it depends also with which action tracks you're looking at. So the production sides and the livelihood is actually one of the main focuses of the summit. The solutions that we come up with should not address only the dietary shifts, or should not address only the productions. So even though our action track is focusing on consumption, when you come up then from the solutions, and the reason why we want to come up with an initial list now in February, while the summit is all the way to September, is to have enough time for continuous developments and making sure that the final set of solutions are truly cross-cutting. So the solution we come up with will ideally be focusing on 2 or more of the action tracks, for example, dietary shifts and the production, or for example, dietary shifts and the livelihood, or all 3. And that's going to be work that we're going to do across all the action tracks through a guiding document that we're working on it, addressing such trade-offs and synergies.
Great, thank you. And then another question about whether the ideas that we are collecting now through February, are they supposed to be just potential solutions, or must they be already demonstrated solutions?
No, they could be both. So it could be just an idea that someone had, or coming up from a certain entity that was not implemented yet, but it has the potential to address several of the barriers or the lock-ins, or kind of the potential to answer the challenge that we currently have. Or it could be an existing initiative or existing solution that already exists out there, is actually working at in certain region or local settings, and has the potential to be scaled up. So we are open to both.
Great. And then another question about the solutions. What are the benefits to submitting an idea? For example, is there a potential for an initiative to receive funding?
Well, since it's a UN, since it's a UN summit, there's no potential of funding, but we are actually working together with the Rockefeller Foundation and an IDO, which they're gonna develop a support tool, which is called the Game Changing Lab. That will help the different stakeholders to support them in capacity building and developing the idea or the initiative even further, even after the summit. And if they made it as a final project or the solution, there could be a potential funding to that. Because for the UN process, the UN system as a whole, is to have the solutions and have them all working together with the stakeholders to see they can commit to that. But at the end of the day, they are voluntary commitments and actions, cannot be forced to any stakeholders. But we want, as an EAT, we want to work beyond that, which to make sure that creating the right incentives and the right resources for the stakeholders to work on. So that's why we're working closely with some philanthropies like Rockefeller, for example, to help us to do that. And where it's currently in the development process, and this will be launched in March, which is after the solution has been announced. So you can keep an eye on that, and I'm sure Emily will be sharing that invitation with all of you when it's launched.
Great, and then kind of building on that a little bit, there's another question about how EAT intends to work further with the solutions after the summit. So noting that the range of solutions is probably very diverse, and how are we intending to follow up on these?
Yeah, so in addition to that Game Changing Lab, which is going to be lasting even after the summit, working closely with those different stakeholders to translate those solutions into actions. Also, we are looking at other tools such as policy camps, for example, together with the Cambridge universities, which works closely with different governments, cities, and other stakeholders to translate those solutions into a set of policies. And then the third ones will be like an impact assessment together with academic institutes, and this is led by Johns Hopkins, to come up with that annual countdown reports to measure those impacts of the final solutions that were announced at the summit.
Great. And there's also a question about whether the solutions that have been submitted or the ideas will be credited. So noting that many of the best solutions are nuanced and detailed, and the work of the organizations and individuals involved might also make the difference between a real solution and just a nice idea.
Oh yes, definitely. So the last question, or I think the one before last in the form, is we keep it optional for the one who's submitting their idea or the proposal for the solution to provide their name and the name of their organization and their contact info, and make it voluntary. And once these are shared, we will have the name of that individual or the organization accredited if the solution actually made it to the final list. And even if not, we want to make that list even open and public, just to show the great variety of the great ideas that were received with the name of the organization individual who submitted them.
Great. Those were all of the questions that I've seen from the audience in the Q&A box and in the chat section. So I guess we can give it another minute to see if anyone else has anything they would like to say or ask. And if not, we can probably wrap up quite soon. So maybe just a quick recap of the upcoming opportunities. So there were a few dates in February that we should all keep an eye out for, right, Lujain?
Yes, and just the link for the survey. The deadline is January 31st, so it's like in 2 weeks from now. So I encourage you all to look at it and see if you have any initiative or idea in mind, then you're welcome to consider these.
Perfect. I haven't seen any additional questions. Oh, wait. Yes, a couple additional questions. Are there any promotional materials about the opportunities that can be shared?
Not really, but I think there's we have for the survey. It's like in social media, so like in Twitter and the Instagram, for example, we have like a social media kit. If interested, we can share it. We can share it with you, as well as there is in the Food Systems Dialogues website. Some materials that can be shared publicly. In addition to that, perhaps, I'm not sure if that was shared already, Emily, or not, we have some background documents that you can share within your networks about the Action Track 2 and the like a 2-pager that summarizes about the food system summits and the different processes. We're happy to share these.
Yeah, we can, I can help facilitate kind of a little packet of follow-up information from this webinar that we can send or make available for any of you who want more of this information. And then there's one final question about whether an initiative can receive funding, which I think was largely answered earlier, where there's no funding automatically associated with this since it's a UN process, but through the Rockefeller Foundation and some other channels, there might be opportunities to apply for funding. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. In that case, I haven't seen, oh, sorry, there are a couple more questions here, almost ready to wrap up. Someone asked a question about, in terms of the circularity element, we had mentioned food waste, but mostly from consumers and canteens. Do we consider industrial food waste or side streams as also part of the kind of circularity work stream?
Yeah, so for the food waste piece, we consider on the in relation to food service, retail, and household. That being said, we are currently in dialogue with Action Track 3 team to consider food waste in other levels as well, including the food industrial level and food loss, because I think that they actually work hand in hand to ensure that the solutions submitted are both addressing food loss and waste, and rather than just food waste. And this is something that we are working on together with the WWF organization to address both issues.
Perfect. So that was all of the questions we've received. I will hand it over back to Luke and Christian for any kind of closing remarks on behalf of the University of Copenhagen. But thank you very much, Lujain, and I hope this has been helpful and interesting for all of you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I look forward to receiving your input and contribution into the process.
Yes, Luke, I don't know if you have any words. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Lujain very much for this highly interesting presentation, and Emily for organizing this. I think this has been very useful, and I'm sure we will get some contributions from the FoodSHIFT project here. So thanks a lot for this. I can also mention that I think it's probably been mentioned already, but that this meeting has been recorded. So we will send a link to the entire consortium so they can also get this information. And then I would, of course, also use this opportunity to promote our next public FoodSHIFT webinar on Thursday, the 21st of January at 12 CET, where we will focus on urban and peri-urban agriculture. So thanks a lot for a very nice webinar today, Lujain and Emily.
Thank you. Thank you, President.
Thanks, everyone. See you online and take care.